A Cricketing View, an irregular podcast about cricket and other things. Hello and welcome to a new episode of A Cricketing View podcast. In this episode, my guests are Jack Shantry, formerly of Worcestershire, who is now a national panel umpire in England, and Daniel Norcross of Test Match Special and formerly of Test Match Sofa. We're going to talk about the laws of cricket and about umpiring and how the two interact. Welcome, Jack. It's very nice to see you.
My pleasure. Nice to be here.
Welcome back, Daniel.
It's always a pleasure. I always love these deep dives, Carters, as well. You know, I'm thoroughly relishing it.
Jack, I want to start with how you got into umpiring and when you got into umpiring. Because, you know, in a fantasy life, I am a test match umpire. I have actually had dreams about standing in a test match at the Wankhede Stadium. I mean, when did you get into it, and when did you decide this is something worth pursuing?
Well, I did my qualifications while I was still playing, so in my mid to late 20s. At which stage I thought I had a long and prosperous career as a seam bowler ahead of me, and then in the end I retired with a back injury a couple of years ago at the age of 30, and so decided to take up umpiring more seriously then when I retired. But I always enjoyed it. Same as you, I would always put myself in that position from a kid, as watching on TV, trying to get the decision right, and always sort of silently punching the air if I did, and then cursing myself if I got one wrong. And even in the nets at Worcestershire, you get these sort of allowances when you're batting, when you're bowling, then the other time is for you to relax or whatever, go in the gym. And I'd find myself more and more standing as an umpire, just watching the balls, watching the batters. I'd be what you'd call in county parlance as a bit of a badger. I'd be involved with cricket all the time, and I'd be interested in the laws and the developments and the playing conditions. So I was always sort of minded towards umpiring. And then the one silver lining of retiring early was that I could take up this hopefully second career as soon as possible.
Was it common for umpires and for wannabe umpires to stand in the nets during practice?
I don't think so. It's certainly common that most professional umpires now in first-class cricket are former players, but the majority of players wouldn't necessarily go into umpiring. So depending on which way you look at it, it is and it isn't common. But for me, I was always minded that way. Try and think of myself as someone who's analytically minded.
What is the training like? Are you, apart from the exams and the books that you probably have to study, what kind of training do you have to undergo before? Is there any training outside of the match situation which is prescribed for you?
The advice I was given was, as soon as you know the laws and you pass your tests, to go out and umpire as quickly as you can and do as much as you can. So I retired with my injury in June of 2018. Yeah. And July, I've been umpiring under 12s, girls, pairs cricket, junior cricket, whatever I can get my hands on, village cricket, because, cricket is cricket at the end of the day. And you'll see things in the amateur game that you won't necessarily see when you umpire professional games. So for me, it was getting into it straight away and umpiring, and having the background of being a professional for 10 years. You have a certain level of knowledge and respect in the game. So that put me in a good position. But in terms of knowing the laws, no, there's not much else apart from that, and obviously the playing conditions. But apart from that, no, get out there and do it would be my advice.
One of the things that I find really weird about the development of an umpire is that, as a cricketer, you were able to see that what you did on the pitch was right or wrong by the results you got, the wickets you got, the runs you scored, you play a bad shot, you bowl a bad ball. You could see it right in front of you. You don't ever get to find out until there are cameras there that you get to analyse it. You get to do it sort of counter level and that, whether you've made the right decision. So when you've come off after umpiring thinking, I might be a good umpire, do you think that day you got what I'm basically saying is you've got no actual kind of proof of whether you did it well or not in terms of the decision-making process, which runs counter to everything that you did know when you were a player, which was that everything was very tightly recorded and marked, and from your own experience as well.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And until you get to that level where you've got 10, 12 cameras watching you, you'll never know if you got a decision right or wrong. And it's always the ones that you think are your best decisions may well be your worst. I remember my first year on the Birmingham League panel, which is a local league in the Midlands. Boyd Rankin was bowling at a very important period of the game, and the batter, who was new to the crease, there was a noise as the ball passed the bat, and it also went very close to the pad, a huge appeal, and I was fairly convinced it was off the back pad, and so gave it not out. And as you do, the bowlers bowler was furious. The slips thought it was out. But then after the game, the batsman said that was a great decision because you just flapped my pad, but I was sure you'd give me out. Now that's all I've got to go off, that it was a good decision. But he could well be lying to me, and so you'd always think, I'd really love to know if I got that one right or not. And until you reach a certain stage, then you will never know. But I think as long as you're following the processes and giving what you see, there's not much else you can do really. Certainly at the level I'm at the moment.
Does it happen then that umpires are going to get into the level where they're on TV and they suddenly they're shocked by what they see, that that they have a tendency to give one type of LBW more than others or something like that?
Yeah, well, I don't know is the honest answer, because I'm a national panel umpire at the moment. I'm a little way off becoming a professional umpire.
Yeah.
But having played as a player, you do get certain umpires who you may get a reputation of, or they're a giver, or they're fairly conservative with their decision making. Yeah. But I think in terms of will there be any umpires at the top level who give certain decisions, they keep mistaking a ball that will hit the stumps, that won't hit the stumps, they get ironed out by the top level. Certainly in recreational amateur cricket, I'm sure that situation does happen, yeah.
We always hear about, how bad behavior on TV begets bad behavior at the local levels. Is there a lot of truth to that?
Yeah, I think it's worse. I think it's worse, the behavior at recreational level, than it is at the top level. Oh. Ian Gould, I think he said he wouldn't umpire a league match for £1 million, which may have been hyperbole knowing Ian Gould. But certainly the point remains that, you do get some behaviour that you wouldn't get at the top level, because certainly in England, first-class cricket is a very small cricketing family. You behave badly 1 week, then 5 weeks later you'll see the same people. You'll very quickly get a reputation. Yeah. Whereas in amateur cricket, people can be more liable to get that sort of white line fever and behave not quite as well. So I think it's testament to the ECB and the ICC globally that the behaviour is very, very good at the top levels, and certainly what we see on TV is very good. But from my experience, it's not always quite that high as you go down the levels.
Can I just follow up on that? Firstly, by agreeing with him entirely, I've played first 11 down to fourth 11 league cricket in Surrey, and the further down the league you get, the worse the behaviour becomes. So actually, the least good cricketers are the most insane on the field of play that I've ever met. But one thing I wanted to ask about was something that I had an interesting insight into umpiring from Jack Hampshire, the late and great Jack Hampshire. And I was sat at a table with him during, I think Leicestershire were playing a county game, and we get the great pleasure of Leicester getting great food, and you sit at the table with the umpires, and Jack wasn't there umpiring, he was there to mentor the umpires. And he talked really eloquently. I said, so what are you there really to see? He says, well, I'm not that interested in whether or not this umpire that he'd come to look at had got the decisions right. What I wanted to see was how he controlled a game, how he made the game happen, which sort of spoke a little bit to the dreaded 3-word phrase spirit of cricket. It was like he was there to sort of marshal the game so that it ran well. Now, how important a facet of that is that in umpiring? For Jack, it seemed to be, because what he wanted to see was a quiet authority. He didn't want a martinet. He didn't want, those sort of football referees that seem to take enormous pleasure in whipping out a yellow card. What he really wanted to see was that he saw nothing. Do you know what I mean? That was the sort of implication, the quiet implication of what he was saying. And if that is important, Jack, how do you get that how do you develop that sort of authority on the field?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, Dan. It's that kind of soft power that you're looking for, finding a way to control the game without resorting to, punishments or dishing out level ones or whatever. So for me, the umpire that I think is the best in the world right now is Michael Goff. And Goffey he's about 6'5" for a start, so that frame and his stature helps him, and he has that kind of quiet authority that you talked to. Having been umpired by him, he's very hard to read, and you wouldn't know if he was having a good game or a bad game, and invariably he'd have a very, very good game. We know how good his decision making is from the DRS reviews this summer. But yeah, that's someone I'd look to replicate or to copy. Be someone like Michael Goff, who has that quiet authority and doesn't need to say anything. It might just be an occasional word, might just be a glance to let you know that you're stepping out of line. That's certainly something that I think certainly professional players respond well to.
The implication there, though, Jack, which is an interesting one, is that players actually need an umpire to make sure that they don't step out of line, that there's some sort of behavior that just needs to be managed, that some people are able to do, and they do it very undemonstrably. But certain umpires aren't very good at ensuring that it doesn't happen, which is quite an interesting implication, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think when you get to professional levels, you're almost obligated as a player to do as much as you can for your team. So you mentioned spirit of cricket earlier, and how often will you see it that a bowler will appeal for one that he doesn't quite think is out, but if he appeals for 2 or 3, that classic sort of third appeal syndrome, by the time the third appeal comes, you've built such a level of not hostility but pressure that the umpire is more likely to give the third one. You see it all the time with celeb appeals from certain bowlers who they want to make sure that decision's given out. So when it gets reviewed, it goes to the third umpire, and if it's umpire's call, because the umpire's given it on the field, then it'll remain umpire's call. So I think all this stuff, as a professional player, as a bowler, you taking wickets is paying your mortgage, so you're obligated to do that kind of stuff. And where it creeps up on spirit of cricket, then you're absolutely right. It's the umpire's job then to step in. But I think it's about knowing those fine lines. And like I say, Michael Goff is certainly one of the best. Murray Erasmus as well, I think, has that kind of quiet authority that, people very rarely step out of line with Murray.
You were a bowler. I mean, you were also famously a batsman in that match against Surrey that I've never forgiven you for, Jack. But you were mostly a bowler. And when you look back on your career now and you think about all those appeals that you did give, when do you sense that that a lot of those weren't out and that you were sort of trying to play the umpire yourself, and so you have a better insight into bowlers as a result of your own career?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, firstly, there weren't many that were given out that weren't out, because the level of umpiring in first class cricket in England is very, very high. So maybe that's me being a bit one-eyed, but I think there's certainly not that many that I think weren't out that were given. I think another thing is if I had a very thin edge as a bowler, I was always convinced that was the ball hitting the bat. Whereas when I've turned into an umpire, I now second guess myself a little bit and take that extra half second to consider. Whereas when I was bowling, I was convinced that was out, and I'd do everything I can in my power to make sure the umpire gave it, which I think is that's the player performing their role properly and the umpire performing their role as well. So I don't see it necessarily a difference between those two behaviours. But I do think that having been on the field professionally for 10 years gives me a bit of an advantage in knowing the mindset of a bowler.
This is actually brings up something I've always wanted to ask an umpire, which is this idea of umpiring spells. Every umpire I've talked to always says that, we only watch one ball at a time. We watch that ball in isolation. It's not related to what happened in the previous ball or the previous over or anything like that. But I mean, if a bowler is sort of trying to attack the top of off stump, and let's say a spinner is trying to attack the top of off stump from outside off, and the batsman is sort of troubled by the length and he's kicking the ball away, and then one looks slightly closer than the others. Is the umpire really able to isolate every ball as just a purely solitary event in that situation? I mean, it seems like humanly impossible, that sort of discipline.
No, I take your point absolutely, and that's the part of the player's role of trying to create that atmosphere. You know, Shane Warne was great at it. You know, having that always appealing, always having that area. So it was always he was creating almost like a cauldron atmosphere for the batsman, but also for the umpire as well. I completely take your point. You can get caught up with the situation as an umpire sometimes, and that's that classic sort of third appeal syndrome. But I think the best umpires are the ones who can sort of get it into discrete ball by ball sort of scenario.
Are you really aware because what a lot of bowlers do is they go up. Graham Swan used to do this brilliantly, didn't he? It's sort of half appeal when he got one that was really close. Then he'd go like really throated, and then he'd sort of look at the umpire and say no, and he'd like gesture, oh, was that just outside off? And then he'd go up really massively as if to say, I've recognised the previous two ones that they weren't quite right. But now, because I'm really going for it, now you must realise that I'm right.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely noticed what you're saying with Swan. He was great at it. Also, we had a bowler at Worcester who was very successful called Alan Richardson. Yes. And his first thing on day one when he was bowling would be to the umpire, I knew that one was missing, only appeal when they're out, just to sort of prime him for the next appeal that comes. He's a bit of kidology.
Yeah, I mean, Anil Kumble used to have this. You know, he used to bowl this leg break on off stump, and the batsman used to come forward and smother it. And, you know, often it used to hit the pad and he wouldn't really appeal. And usually it would be like, it would hit him on the knee roll and half on the knee roll and half on the splice of the bat, right? And then once in a while, he would bowl the other one, which would sort of slide in with his arm. And then even before it hit the pad, Kumble would be up. Because it's like the appeal was not like, what did you think that was LBW? The appeal was, I bowled a different delivery. Give me the decision. You know, and he would often get the decision. I mean, once or twice, it may have been sliding down leg and he'd still get it. Perhaps this is unfair to him, but I always got the impression that Steve Buckner really enjoyed umpiring spells.
Yeah, I was sort of probably a little bit before my time with Steve Buckner. I do remember watching him. He's got a great reputation as a top class umpire. But yeah, no, I can't really speak to Steve Buckner as an umpire that much. But yeah, I remember him sort of growing up as one of the top umpires.
What I love most, I've got to say quickly before we move on about Buckner, was the slightly apologetic way in which he'd give somebody out, which actually worked really well for the umpire, because it was as if to say, look, you know, I haven't got this wrong. I wouldn't give you out if it wasn't the most painful thing in the world for me to do. So, you know, when you give someone out, Jack, do you give it with sort of relish? I mean, Dickie Bird used to the finger just used to fly out. He wasn't really a giver, but when he gave it, he really gave it. You're out. Well, you know, Buckner always looked at the ground and pointed his finger in the air. So, you know, every umpire has their different feeling. Do you see a wicket as a little death, or as a bowler, do you sort of go, yeah, on your way?
I subscribe to the mentality that an umpire should be seen and not heard, and if I can go unnoticed, then that's the best thing for me. So, in the least ostentatious way, I'll try and give the batsman out. Just
briefly, do you do it according to the rules? And like, as I understand the rules, you have to raise your right arm and point your finger skywards. Do you do that?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. What's the other option?
Well, the other is like Dickie's like to point at him, and then who was the umpire who said that, you know, Rudy Kurtzen.
Oh yeah.
Take the arm out, and then like the trigger finger would come out, and it would sort of like, it was really accusatory.
Yeah, that was a slow death, Rudy Kurtzen, wasn't it?
It really was. So you're up in the air, man, like Ian Gould, and like all the Aussies used to be back in the 70s, certainly.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, I think Ian Gould, I remember listening to a talk that he gave. He said his mother told him that it was rude to point, so he would never point at the batsman. He'd always lift his finger skyward, like you described.
Oh, right.
I've sort of broken down the question of the laws into two kinds. The first kind is the law is very clear, it's unambiguous, and as all the laws are arbitrary. There's no real explanation for them. I mean, this is a game where you're flinging a ball and hitting it with a bat, so there's no good reason to do any of that. But basically, there are laws which are unambiguous and clear, but which still really upset a lot of people. Like, for example, I don't like the front foot no ball law, but it's clear. And then there are other laws which used to be clear, but then somebody, batsman, bowler, fielder, some new machinery came along and something new happened, which the law had to reckon with, and the law was not designed to reckon with. And that creates sort of these new tensions. And, actually, the proximal cause of this conversation we're having is that I read in the newspaper that Nathan Lehman, who's England's analyst, has been sending signals to Owen Morgan, tactical signals from the balcony. And this time, they did it by first going to the referee and getting it approved. And then it turned out, yeah, well, it's perfectly fine. It's within the spirit of the game. 20 years ago, when Vollmer and Cronje used the earpiece, the umpires and referees decided that, well, while it was not illegal, it was still unfair. And the referee actually had to call up the MCC and the ICC and get their opinion on whether it was unfair, and it was ruled as unfair. The MCC, the ICC subsequently banned the use of earpieces at that time. What is the difference between an earpiece and a piece of paper?
Well, I think, first of all, it's very, very difficult to stop the spread of information from the dressing room out onto the pitch. And right. I think there is a difference between getting signals from the dressing room to someone, the captain wearing an earpiece in the case of Bob Woolmer and Hansi Cronje.
Yeah.
I think the difference, as far as I'm concerned, is that with Nathan Lehman, it was discreet in the sense that it's pertaining to an individual event rather than Woolmer could theoretically have been giving Cronje in-ball advice, which end to throw the ball to when fielding, which our umpire would consider unfair. But in terms of making a playing condition to stop the spread of information from the dressing room to on the pitch, how you'd go around designing such a condition, I'm not sure. There's already provisions within the playing conditions to protect the DRS decision, so you can't get the coach up on the balcony watching the replay saying, yeah, he's hit that, let's review it. That's already covered in the playing conditions by the ICC. Mm-hmm. It is a grey area. I've seen that Michael Atherton's come out and it doesn't seem to have a big problem with it. Others have come out and they do have an issue with it. In terms of the laws and the playing conditions, I don't think there is an issue. But it'd be interesting to see if anything changes as a result of this.
It's also indicative of a change in the game itself, right? I mean, where the position of both the captain and the coach has changed over 20 years. 20 years ago, it was unthinkable for there to be a big coaching staff. And the idea that the captain would need to get advice on a regular basis from the head coach was considered. I mean, and this is sort of echoed in what Michael Vaughan says about the current episode. But increasingly, especially with T20 and things like that, where you have a dugout and you have your teams hiring analysts to do in-game updates about the situation and about how best to utilize resources and stuff like that. The decision making is shifting, right? And the way the decisions are being made is shifting, and the game is going to have to accommodate those shifts. Is what I think, Daniel.
It strikes me, I don't know what both you guys think about it, but I think this is a function of T20 cricket. It's one of the wonderful aspects of cricket that it evolves in front of your very eyes. The laws themselves evolved very rapidly in the 19th century to cover off a whole series of transgressions, the LBW law, the width of the bat law, the addition of stumps, all those things in order to create the game that roughly looks like what we have now. T20 came in and disrupted our understanding of cricket. I mean, if you were going to devise T20 with the same eyes as you would have devised Test cricket, you wouldn't give each team 10 wickets to fall in 20 overs. I mean, that is not cricket as we understand it. So you have this new game, which is, after being roundly ridiculed, has become probably one of the most intensely tactical formats of cricket that you could wish to see. So I think where you get these signals happening, to see them happening in T20 cricket does not surprise me. I don't really see them happening in Test cricket because of the length of the game and the fact that you go back and talk to your coaches at lunch and tea and it's a 5-day game. But when you have T20, I think the innovations in T20 actually they come so quickly that it's almost like lawmakers are overwhelmed by it. So this might bring us on to the next point of interest, which is the switch hit.
Yes.
Which really is an innovation, because batsmen are now having to find ways to score at ever more ludicrous rates.
Indeed.
You've got to be going at 9, 10 and over, which of course is not cricket as we've ever understood it. So to do that, you have to start trying to play shots that no one had ever imagined. So suddenly somebody's playing it left-handed. I mean, Kevin Peterson did do it, but Glenn Maxwell did it most recently. It caused a furore. Ian Chappell, not being happy with this notion. And of course, that challenges lawmakers, because there are certain things about the setup of cricket and the laws of cricket, which are the LBW law. Your leg stump is determined by which hand you bat with, right hand or left hand. Now, if you then play the switch hit, you've basically you've basically taken that, you've done something that confuses umpires and lawmakers. Personally, I don't know what you think about this, but I believe the solution is very simple. The switch hit is so extraordinarily difficult that you don't want to see it go out of the game. But if somebody does it, they basically now have 2 off stumps. They don't have a leg stump. So they can be LBW if the ball pitches outside their new leg stump, if you get my drift.
Yeah. And Jack will be able to give us the precise legal situation here. But as I understand it, the offside is defined in cricket in the LBW law. And the LBW law refers, when you say offside, so the laws of cricket, the most recent one, which is the 2019 edition, which is the second edition of the 2017 code. Excuse me. It has 42 laws and 5 appendices. And the offside is never defined in words in the laws of cricket. Everything else is defined in words. Appendix A specifically exists to define terms which are not defined in the laws themselves. And in that, there is something called A13, which defines offside. And it defines it using a picture, not words. It shows a right-handed striker, and it says that this is behind the popping crease on the offside, this is behind the popping crease on the leg side. It's basically trying to establish an asymmetrical field. Because the offside and the leg side are defined as soon as the ball comes into play, which is when the bowler is running up, is at the top of his run-up. Basically, which are legal fielding positions, which are illegal fielding positions, that's defined by the definition of offside and leg side. And if the batsman then gets to just completely dismantle that by switching hands, then as far as I know, other than the wide law, there is no further penalty to the batsman. Is there, Jack?
No, that's right. I think have ready in Chappell's piece. I think perhaps some of the feeling that it's unfair is the asymmetry that the bowler has to tell the batsman which hand they're going to bowl with. If the bowler's doing that, then why should the batsman can choose which hand to play with the bowler having set a field for a right-handed batsman in the case of Glenn Maxwell, say. So I would happily see a change of law when the bowler can bowl with either hand. Now, we don't want to get into a position where we're de-skilling the players. And if you're saying you no longer switch at the ball, well, as a fan or someone who likes watching cricket, I feel like I'm going to be robbed of something. Whereas if you suddenly change the law and now a bowler, imagine seeing a left-arm seamer coming up to bowl and suddenly switches and bowls right-handed. that adds to the game rather than takes away. So rather than de-skilling the players, I'd happily see a law that allows a bowler now to switch it which hand he bowls the ball with.
And also, you can, if you've forfeited, I think, essentially your leg stump by switch hitting, then you just change the wide, then becomes, it's got to be really wide on both sides. So the risk that the switch hitting right-hander takes, in my view, if you just do that slight tweak to the law, is that if the bowler then spears the ball down what was previously your leg side, that's now become your offside as well as the other side. Do you get my drift?
Yes.
Now you're not stopping somebody from playing the switch hit, but you're not disbenefiting the bowler, because if the bowler sees somebody switch hitting, then they're going to want to spear the ball wide of what has now become their new offside, their left-handed offside, yeah? And if you then wide that ball, that seems unfair on the bowler to me.
That is currently the case. Certainly in second 11 cricket that I've umpired in limited overs, Dan, if the batsman even swaps their hands over, then the leg side wide now becomes the offside wide, if you see what I mean. So that's currently the case of the playing conditions in second 11 cricket.
Jack, do you foresee a change to the LBW law for limited overs cricket, given the switch hit? Because I mean, there's historical precedent for this, right? I mean, May and Cowdery padded very effectively against Ramadin and Valentine in, I think, 57. And they changed the law after that. They said, okay, well, if you're going to kick the ball away, we're going to let the umpires give it out. And so they've expanded the LBW law in response to batsmen sort of quote unquote abusing it. So do you think the switch hit is an event that's that makes the law ripe for further expansion?
I don't see why not. I haven't got a strong opinion on it, I must say. I certainly wouldn't like to see the shot outlawed, as Ian Chappell was mentioning, as Dan said. But yeah, being a former bowler, I always feel it's a batsman's game. So anything that brings the playing field a little bit more level in favour of the bowler, then I'd be all for.
I mean, some of these batsmen are admittedly hitting sixes, reverse sweeping without switching hands. It's not. It really is a question of It's not just a question of batsmen taking advantage of the law. I think it's a question of the batsmen just learning something new. But this is one of those ambiguities in the law, which is that the offside has never been defined in words. And is there a case for doing that, or is there is it because if they say right-handed striker, that it's not clear what a right-handed striker is either.
I don't think there's any ambiguity in case. When you actually watch a match, people know what the law is, don't they? I wouldn't say that's
yeah, exactly. It's it when you see it, but it's not really it's not discursive.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, it is one of the odd things about cricket, isn't it? That and about law, about codifying generally, which is that we think that we must be able to make everything into words. Yeah. Whereas there's this horrible sort of grey area, which is often exploited by centre-right politicians, called common sense, which is supposed to sort of supersede the law. And we say, well, this is the common sense. That's obviously a right-hander. That's obviously a left-hander. But it does sort of bring into question certain things. If you can't define precisely what that area is, it calls into question why do we still have a law that says you can't be out LBW the moment the ball pitches outside your leg stump? Now, I have a feeling about why, and my feeling is that if we could be out LBW with a ball pitching outside leg stump, it would change the game of cricket as a spectacle in such a way that we didn't like it so much, because right arm bowlers to right arm batsmen and left arm bowlers to the left-handed batsman would come round the wicket and try to spear the ball into leg stump, which would force batsmen to adopt a different stance, and the whole game would resemble baseball more or something like that. I don't know. I can't quite put it into words what I mean, but we sort of, given that the LBW law was created, I say philosophically, but it was created to prevent people from simply standing in front of their stumps and preventing themselves getting out. Why did we say, well, if the ball pitches outside leg stump, it really doesn't matter? Why did we say you've got to be playing a shot? I mean, why does it matter if you're playing a shot or not when the ball hits you outside the line of off stump? I'm not quite sure that I entirely understand why, but I think I feel like I know why. Do you know what I mean?
Jack, do you want to take that?
No, after you.
It has no justification beyond history. I mean, it's just where the incremental expansion landed. And I'm absolutely convinced that there will be a further expansion within our lifetime. I don't know what it will be.
The expansion may come against our will because of the desire to make the game more explicable. So sitting as I do in a commentary box, I get an awful lot of pressure from people around making the game accessible, because cricket has always attacked itself for inaccessibility and has always asked, why isn't it as popular as football and things like that? And the easy answer is to say, well, look at the laws of cricket. Look at these umpires presiding over the laws of cricket. They've all got to be like Einsteins and brainiacs to be able to maintain all this information, or, like the equivalent of London taxi drivers. They've got to have brains that can absorb all this information. How can you expect that game to be popular when you've made it so complicated? If you've tried to explain to somebody what LBW is, it's, well, the ball hit his pad, that hit his leg before hitting the wicket, and he got in the way of the wicket. It was going to hit the wicket, and the umpires decided it's out. So then you see that the ball pitches outside the line of leg stump, and someone says, well, why isn't that out? And he said, well, it pitched outside the line of leg stump. And they go, what the fuck are you talking about? Now, as somebody who's in the entertainment industry, I would love to be able to give the answer, but I have a fear that because we can't, we may end up with our game being changed through commercial pressures, if you like, through entertainment pressures, in order to make the game more explicable. Or am I simply falling into the same trap as everyone else of worrying too much about cricket and everything will be all right in the end?
Is there a case that the leg side's always been seen as, the dirtier side? You think of a classical player, he plays through the offside very well, whereas the leg side, that's sort of the agricultural side. It's the lower order batter. So when you think of someone bowling really well, a ball that pitches on a half volley that pitches outside leg stump, for that to get a wicket, there's almost a discord there. Certainly as a bowler, again, I can see the value in opening up both sides for LBWs, but it doesn't look like a good ball. A ball that pitches outside leg stump and it's going to clip leg doesn't look like a good ball in the same way that a ball that's nipping away around fourth off stump does.
I mean, we were always told that, the leg side is the blind side, and that, the ball pitching outside leg stump is somehow pitching behind the batsman in a sense. Because the batsman has to swivel and hit around himself to hit the ball into the leg side behind him.
It's a side-on game. Because it's a side-on game, so it's a form of skullduggery to try to get somebody out that way. I mean, you remember when Ashley Giles was bowling the balls outside leg stump to Sachin Tendulkar, deemed to be the most terrible negativity. Of course, the same thing.
It was a great tactic.
Yeah, I mean, the same thing didn't apply when Shane Warne did it regularly over and over again. But I guess what I mean is that I think Jack's right. I think there's this idea that the leg side is somehow Untermenschen. It's, there's something wrong with it. But also, I do think that there's a sense to it that goes beyond just a slightly bourgeois cavilling. I think the structure and the shape of the game would change so massively if you change that law.
Yes.
So somehow, I think that we all have a collective understanding without really being able to justify it within the philosophical parameters we created by creating LBW in the first place, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, but Jack, this is why I think that, if the batsmen are going to provide an opening by switching hands, then perhaps that is the opening to expand the law in some way.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I agree with you completely, Kartik, and that's a very good point.
The background to this question is that it's slightly from the grounds that as a broadcaster, we're expected to be able to explain the game, and we're always expected to explain the game to newcomers. It's almost as if our role is never to explain the game to the people who love it. It's to try to drag new people into it constantly. And so that forces me to ask various questions about the internal coherence of cricket. And one of the things that has always struck me as slightly unusual is that if you get a bit of bat on the ball, you can't be out LBW. But if you get a bit of bat on the ball, you can be bowled. And yet the LBW law is there to prevent people getting their leg in the way of the ball before it would have hit the stumps. Now, I can appreciate that before we had technology, it was just so difficult for an umpire to be able to say, well, since he's got an inside edge in it, I have no idea whether that's going to hit the stumps because the deviation happened so far away and so far away from the umpire and so close to the stumps that you can't judge it. But we have technology now in some games that will be able to determine that. And indeed, if you were doing a game without technology, I don't know how many times I've seen somebody cut a ball from outside off stump, get a thick inside edge back onto their boot right in front of middle stump and get away without being bowled because their leg is there. So why is it internally coherent that you can never be out LBW for getting an inside edge, but you can play on? And I have not been able to answer that question. It's mostly Americans that ask it.
I don't know. Well, the obvious answer, because he's hit it in law. I'm trying to think of it. There's a moral answer to it as well. I mean,
but if he's hit it,
edge, that changes the trajectory of the ball as well. So you're saying the trajectory of the ball, had it not hit the inside edge, or the trajectory of the ball once it hit the inside edge, would that have then hit the stumps?
I think he means the second one.
Yeah, I think what I'm saying is that you can be outplayed on, so you can inside edge the ball onto your stumps. But you can't inside edge the ball onto your pads that are in front of the stumps and be out. Yeah,
because the bowler hasn't deceived the batsman to such an extent that they've missed the ball, I suppose.
So in that case, should you really be bowled if the moment you get bat on ball, should you ever really be bowled?
But it's not such a clean game in that only poor actions or poor shots get punished, because you can nick the ball between the keeper and first slip for four. If that's your outlook, then surely that should be out as well because the bowlers deceive the batsman. Bad shots go for boundaries and good shots get caught sometimes. I mean, that's just a case of the batsman's been deceived, but not sufficiently to be out within the laws, as far as I can see it.
I think the question Daniel puts is an interesting one. But I think what you're saying, Jack, about the morality of the action, or it's not really the morality, it's more the virtue of the action, right? Or the virtuosity of the action, or lack thereof. And both are sort of interesting facets of the law, right? And basically, I think the question is, suppose you lived in a universe where we could say with precision that the inside edge was going to go on to hit the stumps. Then why wouldn't the inside edge be treated exactly the same as the absence of the inside edge? If that's exactly the same as it is in the case of bowled, because LBW ultimately exists, to prevent batsmen from stopping themselves getting bowled. That's the and the answer so far has been that, well, once there's an inside edge, nobody can really be sure where the ball is going, because nobody can see the ball in that split fraction of the second.
But then how would you differentiate between, say, an inside edge or a very fine dink sweep, but rather than dink sweeping it just wide of the keeper, you dink sweep it into your own pad? If it's the middle of the bat and then goes onto your pad and it would have hit the stump but for the pad, should that be out as well if it hit the middle of the bat?
I'm suggesting that any ball that would have hit the stumps should be given out, because that's the sort of logical conclusion that newcomers to cricket think the LBW law does. So when they first watch cricket and they see somebody being given out LBW, they go, "Why is that out?" You say, "Well, because his pad prevented the ball from hitting the stump." So then they see somebody edge the ball onto their pads in front of the stumps, and they say, "Why isn't that out?" And you say, "Well, because he got an edge on it." And they go, "What's an edge?" And you go, "Well, he got some of the bat on it." And they go, "Well, what difference does that make? The ball was going to hit the stumps." And you say, "Well, I don't really know, but I think the reason was that it was impossible to tell in the past with the human eye. So they just thought it was easier to make that rule." And that's the only answer I can come up with. And I sort of wonder whether now that we can predict that using technology, that we might want to bring in, the leg before played on rule. Is basically my suggestion.
I don't know, Daniel.
It makes for 3-day test matches for sure.
It makes for I think it makes for a very nice way to explain the LBW law to viewers and to newcomers. But I think in general, I think with cricket, and maybe this is me, and maybe only 5 people like me and Jack and 3 others in the world will agree about this. But I tend to think that when there's something subtle and complicated in the game, it's your job and the job of the people who do your job to explain the subtle and complicated stuff to those people. We shouldn't get the subtle and complicated stuff out of the game.
Yeah, intuitively, I'd agree with you. I mean, I hadn't considered the question before, I'll be honest, Dan, and it is a very interesting question.
I do appreciate that this has never been probably brought up before, but it's and I apologise for it. But it's something that I can't avoid when trying to explain it to people who don't get cricket. But I think what you're saying, Carters, is that I've just got to say they need to rise above these childish things. It's a bit like teaching a 5-year-old about death. Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, not death. I mean, let's.
Life is unfair.
I mean, I'm way older than 5, and you couldn't teach me about death. I mean, like that's not a fair comparison. No, well, it's like this is cricket. This is our game, and you better understand it. It's not going to come to you. That's the purest position.
Okay.
You have to draw a line in the sand somewhere.
Okay, I'll live with that. I mean, this is an attempt to ensure that Test cricket continues, and I have a horrible fear the authorities are bothered by it because it lasts so long. So the quicker the wickets fall, and unless we just get Ray Julian to umpire every game, we are in danger. I mean, this is taking us back to a previous conversation, but Ray Julian always used to be of the opinion, didn't he, that once number 8 came in, if it hit the pads, it was out, because it was best to get on with it.
Yeah, move the game along. Yeah. I was told by an unnamed umpire last year that I need to up my strike rate. My strike rate wasn't high enough for my first few months.
Really?
Yeah, got to keep the game moving. That's part of your job.
Jeez, that's quite fascinating, because not in any way wanted to get you to talk about who that was, but there is that feeling within cricket that part of being a good umpire is actually, we hate people who don't give. But people who watch the game all the time, especially for a living, their hearts sink if you don't have an umpire that is a little bold and is prepared to give.
Sure, they were saying it in jest, but you do get the sense that certainly as a number 9 or 10 batsman for most of my career, you certainly has got the sense that you wouldn't get the same 50% calls that maybe an opening batsman would.
So, but that brings me to something, not like the informal shenanigans, screwing tailenders, but, you have the laws of cricket, which are published, right? The playing conditions for the tournaments, which are also published, and the ICC's code of conduct, which is also published. But I'm told that the authorities also give umpires directives about how they're supposed to sort of shift the interpretation of different things like, DRS, some aspect of DRS, some aspect of LBW, some aspect of boundary catches, some aspect of the over rate law. And those directives are never published, but the umpires have them. to what extent do those, I mean, how significant are those?
Yeah, you make a good point. The one that recently interested me was the back foot no ball. So the back foot no ball is currently interpreted as first point of contact. So Ben Stokes very often bowls wide of the crease, especially around the wicket to left-handers. And back foot contact, the first point of contact is where you adjudicate from, rather than if say his heel strikes and then after that another part of his boot may touch the line. It's first contact that you go off.
Why do you think the back foot no ball law exists? Because it's one of those weird laws that I can't see how it benefits a bowler to bowl wider and wider of the crease. Because once that angle widens so much, it takes out a whole series of potential dismissals. Now, I appreciate that the laws of cricket are there to sort of prevent people taking them too far. Sort of Warwick Armstrong of Australia would probably, would bend a rule as far as it could possibly go. But how does it actually benefit a bowler to bowl wide of the crease? Why do we have it at all? Why don't we just scrap that law?
Well, the front foot isn't constrained by any law in terms of width. Obviously, you can't step over the popping crease. But you can bowl as wide as you want with your front foot. But the only constrainment is the back foot has to be, within that line. So if you got rid of that law, then theoretically you could have them bowling from 50 yards away or so, which is impossible to adjudicate from. So I assume that's part of the reason. But I must admit, you've stumped me again, and I haven't thought that deeply about why that law is in place. But I assume it's just that constrains the bowler from bowling more than, say, 6 feet away from where the umpire's standing.
I don't know what would be wrong with that, though, because it doesn't help a bowler, does it, to bowl from further away? I mean, I've always wondered about this, about bowling behind the line as well, because it only makes things harder for a bowler to be bowling from further away. Obviously, there's a degree of deceit in there for the batter if suddenly the ball comes out from a further distance, but they've got that much longer to see it. So I've always wondered why we bother to constrain bowlers in that way, whereas a lot of the laws of cricket are about trying to create, weirdly, as few restraints as possible, despite the number of laws there are. Mike Brearley talked eloquently about how he would love to have seen 50 over cricket played to the rules of Test cricket, because actually Test cricket with it has fewer
restrictions.
Fewer restrictions, exactly. So I don't know if we'll get to the bottom of that one, but I do wonder about why it exists.
I think we need to be careful to a certain extent, because the laws of cricket govern all cricket rather than just the 0.1% of cricket that's televised and is between international teams. And if you can bowl from wherever you want, how are you going to extend that popping crease line 50 feet in both directions from both ends? So there's a logistical point as well to consider. But yeah, please take your point philosophically.
No, but that's a good point. I think that's a pretty important point, because we often sort of one malaise that we have is that a lot of us tend to think of cricket as something we watch on TV, and something which governs who wins and who loses among these highly skilled professional players, whereas most cricket is not like that. I mean, I can imagine like games on the Maidans of Bombay being basically impossible if you didn't have the back foot no ball law, because the pitches are arranged such that mid on for one pitch is basically short cover for another pitch, so you would have all sorts of, if you couldn't sort of order things at least a little bit, you would have a lot of trouble.
That's a fair point. Within all the laws that you obviously preside over, are there any that umpires find either confusing or unnecessary or difficult to administer? Not so much adjudicate, but administer, because obviously the adjudication it's just a difficult thing to do anyway. But are there any that you as a sort of collective group go, I don't know why quite we do that?
I haven't had the conversation with other umpires. law 21.4, without this being a consciousness raising exercise towards 21.4, that's something that concerns me a little bit and may need some looking at. So basically, if a batsman's out of his crease before the bowler's bowled, the bowler can have a run-out attempt.
Mm-hmm.
That's not been used that much, but that's certainly one. That's the answer that comes to my head straight away, Dan.
Interesting. And why do you find that slightly more problematic?
Because it's not cricket. You can be a few inches out of your crease, and the bowler throws the ball. And if you play the ball thinking it wasn't meant as a throw, then you're out. So that to me, there's a discord in there, and it does go back to sort of morality. I went into umpiring because I want to umpire a game fairly, and you want the best team to win rather than the ones who use the laws to their advantage as such. And that's the one that just came to mind straight away.
Do you think we're getting to a point where we will have T20 specific laws, though? Yeah, given the previous point about by Brearley and about 50-over cricket, Jack?
Yeah, I can certainly see them changing the playing conditions around T20. I don't know. It's a constant sort of arms race, isn't it, between the bowlers and batters? And as I see it, over the last 10 or 20 years, we've certainly seen a move towards higher scores, especially in limited overs cricket. Batters are more aggressive. We're seeing fewer draws in Test match cricket. Mm-hmm. And so in the arms race, it feels like the batters are winning. Drainage around grounds is a lot better. You see fewer wet pitches. We saw the other day the pitch before the match in New Zealand against the West Indies. It was like the outfield, and yet they scored 500. So I think the governing body may have to look at that at some point. But it also, the bottom line is, it comes down to money. And if spectators and TV viewers would rather see scores of 450 over cricket than 250 for 8, or the World Cup final that we saw between England and New Zealand, if they'd rather see the high-scoring game, then we will see more laws in favour of the batting team. But from a personal point of view, I would like to see a little bit of a levelling of the playing field and a little bit more, especially in one-day cricket, because the new ball doesn't swing really in white ball cricket. A little bit of a reverse, but now with 2 new balls, that's not really happening either. My favourite bowler growing up was Wasim Akram because he swung it so much, highly skilled. Would he have the same success now with the balls they're using and the boundary sizes and the bats? I'm not quite so sure. And that, to me, doesn't feel intuitively right. But, the game's changing, certainly. Whether we can change the laws to redress the balance, I'm not so sure.
Well, one law that seems obvious that we could change is one that I touched on a little bit earlier, but still, I have to say I find this one a difficult one to explain to people, is why you can be out LBW playing a shot if the ball hits you outside the line, not playing a shot, rather, if the ball hits you outside the line of the off stump, but you're not out if the batsman defeats your shot. Now, there are 2 reasons why I find this weird. Firstly, the batsman has defeated your bat. So the bowler has defeated your bat. So the bowler has won there. And yet your pad was in the way and prevented the wicket from falling. And secondly, we ask umpires to give subjective judgments on what is a shot. And I would imagine, Jack, that you must have been in umpiring in many situations where you had to sort of think, is that a shot? Now, Ricky Ponting disguising playing a shot is a bit different from, say, a number 10 batsman who might very well be trying to play a shot, but got really, really late on the ball, so he didn't actually get his bat down on it. And you're being asked to sort of think about intent as much as anything else, aren't you, when you're deciding, is a shot being offered?
If I can just jump in before Jack, you answer. I put out a tweet saying I was going to have this conversation. And this was something that came up more than 3 or 4 times, which surprised me, which is that batsmen tuck their bat in behind the pad and pretend to play the ball where they have no intention of playing the ball. And do they get away with, pretending that they're offering a shot?
When we're commentating, we see it I don't know whether we see it more and more or whether we talk about it more and more, but we do go, well, that'd be interesting if it goes to the third umpire, because the third umpire might take a view that he's not played a shot. But then we discover that actually the standing umpire has told the third umpire that they, by their judgment, is that they have played a shot. And so, you then see the replay and you think, well, I'm not really sure that really was a shot.
Yeah.
Jack, how do you handle that particular judgment?
No, I think it's a very good point, and just you do it to the best of your ability, and you go off, what you've seen before as a player and as an umpire. I completely take your point, and to a large extent, you're pushing an open door, because I do accept that very often you'll get players who deceive the umpire in that way. Is the reason that the law's there in the first place a function of there'd just be too many wickets if you didn't have that rule, and if the law was you could be out regardless of where the ball strikes you? Maybe that's going back to an historical point. But in terms of judging whether or not he's played a shot, I do think the best umpires tend to get that one right. It's a judgment call as with anything else. But I do think the more you play the game and you trust that gutting instinct, you can tell more often than not.
You see, the reason why it sort of comes to me is that the 1957 incident that Carter's was talking about caused a change in the law because two batsmen adopted a kicking the ball away rule. If it pitched outside the off stump, they got their pad out to it and kicked it away. So they brought in, you've got to play a shot. We're increasingly seeing players in a way that never used to happen before take guard on middle and off, sometimes even off. Steve Smith, Marnus Labuschagne, Hashim Amla always used to play off spinners by standing on off stump, making it really, really difficult. I mean, almost next to impossible for an off spinner to get an LBW. Graham Swan will talk to you eloquently about trying to bowl to Hashim Amla and how it basically destroyed one method of dismissal. And Steve Smith sort of does that. And he makes me ask about the LBW law because he gets so far outside off stump. Now, you might say that he allies that with an incredible hand-eye to be able to play the counter to that, which is the bowler trying to spear the ball into leg stump. So we should go, well, that's fine, because actually he's taking in a massive risk and he's winning. But I don't know what you guys both think about that.
The player, you mentioned a few great ones there, Hashim Amla, Steve Smith, Labuschagne. The one I have in mind, who I bowled out a lot in my career, was Jonathan Trot. Now, I have an uncle who doesn't like cricket so much, but will watch it occasionally when it's on. And he came into the room at a time when the commentator said, the one place you don't bowl at Jonathan Trot is at the stumps. And my uncle couldn't get his head around this. But what kind of player is this? You can't bowl at the stumps. You can't dismiss him. But actually, it's such a highly skilled thing to do. There's many players in county cricket who've batted on middle and off stump, and their LBW percentages are sky high because it's very, very difficult to middle every single ball at your stumps if you're batting on middle and off or off stump. So Amla, Smith, Trot may be the exception rather than the rule.
I have a question which leads from something I learned about batsmen recently, which is that when they're facing fast bowling, they don't really watch the ball all the way on to the bat from the hand. They sort of pick up the ball as it leaves the hand, and then they judge what its trajectory is, what its length is, and what its trajectory is. And then their eye moves to where they expect the ball to arrive and where they expect to meet it. And that's how they get into position. How do umpires see a ball traveling at 90 miles an hour?
It's interesting. Some umpires will watch a spot. They'll look towards the batsman and pick the ball up in their peripherals. Some other umpires, mainly former batsmen, will try and pick up the seam. There's a couple of umpires I can think of who look at the seam on the ball. That they'll have a very, very narrow focus and try and pick up the seam. And especially when if it's a bowler bowling fast from wide of the crease, it's sometimes hard to look from, because obviously you're looking down for the front foot no ball, and you're looking down from there to then pick the ball up, which may well have travelled 4 or 5 yards by the time your eyes have then met the ball. It tends to be that you'll find more umpires will focus on a space. Maybe it'll be the point on the pitch or a point around the batsman, then wait for their peripheral vision to pick the ball up. I do think it's an individual thing. Certainly, I know umpires who do both.
Do you feel you require a lot of practice getting used to that kind of pace, or if you played against it, then as you have probably in county cricket, then it becomes easier?
I think it's like facing fast bowling. The higher up the levels you go, the smaller your reaction time is, and I think that's the same with umpiring. You can umpire against a bowler bowling 60 miles an hour fairly easily. The classic one is the left arm bowler swinging the ball back into a right-handed batsman. Does the ball pitch in line? Is it pitching on leg stump just outside? Making that decision at 60 miles an hour isn't so difficult. If it's Mitchell Stark bowling at 92, 93 miles an hour, all of a sudden it's very difficult. So the best umpires are the ones who have that. They can make the correct decision in such a small reaction time. So I think that's certainly the route that I look to take, is try and not move your eyes so much. So focus on a narrow spot, and then make that reaction time as quick as you can.
We always say, but the classic cliche on commentary is, because we're sitting rather 100 yards away, sometimes more, and high up. Oh, that looks close. And then the umpire doesn't give it out. And then we say, well, he's got the best view in the house, we should defer to him. Now, my summariser is always actually watching the TV. He doesn't watch what's happening there. And that's part of the reason why they always sound like they know way more about what the ball's done than we do, because they sit there looking at the monitor. Can I ask you, you've watched cricket as a bowler, you've watched cricket as an umpire, you've watched cricket as a TV, on the TV, because you'd have seen yourself doing it loads, and you've watched it on the TV loads, and you've also been in the commentary box. What genuinely is the best place to determine what's the best view in the house?
Well, firstly, I've summarised with you before, Dan. You never told me that trick, that the summariser watched the TV. The trick of the trade.
Why did you work it out? That's what's supposed to make you look clever.
The best one is where you can watch it 3 or 4 times, then make your mind up. That's always the best way.
Yeah, but genuinely, do you have the best view in the house, like straight down like that, or is it easier to judge from a TV monitor, do you think?
I think sometimes you do. Certainly, so LBWs, I think you've got the best seat in the house. Certainly better than the bowler, because the bowler's always offset. He's bowling over around the wicket. But in terms of for height of the LBW, very often the square leg will have a good view for the height, and that's why with certainly in one-day cricket, if the ball's above the shoulder high, the umpire will generally defer to the square leg umpire for how high the ball is. I think it just depends. You'll sometimes get caught out if a fielder or a batsman is blocking your view for a catch in the outfield, and that's when you work as a team with your other umpire as well. But generally speaking, you have got a better view than the bowler. The bowler will always be offset a little bit, and they're in their follow through, generally speaking. But then with watching on TV, you have that classic foreshortening of the lens effect for the catches. But then I suppose that's offset by the fact you can watch it 5 or 6 times in super slow motion. So the soft signal they give in Test cricket generally is a pretty good indicator, I think. But yeah, although I said it in jest, I think watching things 3 or 4 times as a commentator, you've always got a slight advantage.
Oh, we really do. But there's a couple of tricks that I've been told by former players, which is that if you see the ball bounce up off a pad as opposed to down off a pad, then that's the moment when you instantly ask yourself, is that going over? So, like the marginal knee roll decisions. Has that gone up off the pad? Has it gone down off the pad? Because that's essentially 9 times out of 10, they claim, that will tell you if it's just going to sneak over the stumps. As an umpire, do you even think like that, or is it just instinct?
Yeah, that's a great heuristic to have. Whether it's going to bounce high, that one you're talking about there is around about the knee roll. So if they're on the front foot and it bounces up off the knee roll, then yeah, you're thinking straight away height. Another classic one is if it bounces into the covers for a right-handed batsman, you think it's going to be straighter than if it bounces off to the leg side, because you think how it glances the pad which side does it hit? Does it go back towards the offside? Generally, it's going to be a little bit straighter. Or if it goes away to the leg side, generally going down leg. Obviously, these are very sort of rule of thumb things. There's a great book actually called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. He talks about System 1 and System 2. How System 1 that makes 98% of your decisions. That's the fast, automatic part of your brain, like the gut feel type. And then System 2 is the slow, effortful, deliberate part of your brain. I think the best umpires, well, everyone makes their decisions pretty much with System 1. And those ones that you talk about, is it hitting just in line? Is it going just over, just hitting leg stump? That's that System 1 part of your brain. But as long as you engage that System 2 part of the brain as well, and you make that slow, effortful decision as well, I think generally speaking, if you've played for a long, long time or umpired for a long, long time, or even watched the game for a long, long time, you generally get those marginal calls right.
On the one hand, you have, Daniel and, his friends and colleagues in the commentary box and in the press box who serve the game and have to describe it to the public for a living, and who are confronted daily with the realities of cricket, the realities of, the business of cricket as an entertainment and as a professional sport. And then on the other hand, there's someone like me who watches it obsessively because I like it, but it's not my job. And my view on cricket is that all its sophistications and grays and nuances and subtleties are actually, simple and elegant, and we should keep them. And if people don't understand them, well, they should do the work to try and understand them. And Daniel's view is a little more humane because he's a much nicer person than I am. And he says that, well, cricket is going to have to live in the real world, and it's going to have to change with the times, and the laws are going to have to become simple. And part of that has to do with bringing more machinery in to make decisions. And you already have that with DRS. And, I can foresee a time where, you won't need to stand out in the middle. You can just sit in a TV booth, a nice, warm TV booth, and, watch a screen and adjudicate the game from there. How do you feel about this? Is there any place for my position in this argument at all?
Yeah, I certainly hope so. I must say I'm more aligned with your position there, certainly for the first half of your question. Just to start with the second part, I mean, you're absolutely right that sort of computers and DRS, AI, you identified a wider trend in that AI will make a lot of people redundant in the coming years, and I can see a way for cricket to do that as well. Certainly with the front foot no ball is going to get taken away from the umpires in the coming years. I can see that happening definitely. But yeah, I'd be careful about not dumbing down, but simplifying things a little bit. I think we might lose what we all love about cricket. I mean, I'd love to hear. I'm sure Daniel will give an excellent reason for why he would like to change some of the laws in that way. But to me, it feels like we have to be very careful about it without losing what it is that we love about the game as well.
To defend myself, I guess what I'm not saying is that we need to change all the laws. It's that I get confronted with these questions, and so I do my best to find answers to them. And I think one of them that does continue to rankle with me, I haven't even raised yet, is that batsmen don't get given runs for leg byes, because that to me is preposterous. They've done all that work for their team. And
the leg does belong to the batsman.
And the leg does belong to the batsman, especially if it can get you out. I mean, there's a jeopardy involved there. and you've got to pretend to play a shot while you're getting those runs. And my average would have soared around about 17.5 if I'd had leg byes, I tell you.
I knew this was completely altruistic,
Yeah, it was until I made that point. But I guess I started to see cricket developing into different games: Test cricket, 50-over cricket, and T20 cricket. And T20 cricket, having been brought up with Test cricket and being brought up to love the fact that the game was so a perfect marrying between bat and ball, And I'm not seeing that happening in T20. It's devised, sort of separated from the original decisions around cricket, 10 wickets being the most obvious thing. You can't have 10 wickets in 20 overs. That's crazy. They invented 10 wickets per innings over the course of 2 or 3 days with 2 innings per side in the past. So, how is this really any kind of jeopardy for 20 over cricket? And I wonder whether we might be thinking about different laws, especially for LBW, around, playing a shot or not playing a shot around off stump and outside the off stump, just to bring bowlers back into play and just to bring the skills of the bowlers that are legion and we love. And that's part of, speaking as a person who broadcasts cricket, I can tell you that there is no greater atmosphere in a cricket ground than when wickets fall. It's not when runs get scored, it's when wickets fall that people go absolutely batshit crazy. And when they fall in clusters, that's when you get the real buzz and the goosebumps and the hairs going up on your back. So I'm slightly worried that we're in danger of turning this into a spectacle of range hitting. But cricket always manages to right itself. It's like sort of the perfect roll-on, roll-off ferry, really. It just rights itself in any weather conditions. And I wonder which of those laws will be slightly altered to make those happen. There may be playing conditions. I don't know. But, yeah, that's where I sit. Although I suspect that I'm probably spiritually more in both your camps, even if you've trashed all my ideas.
Well, Jack, I think this could go on forever, and if the world was really as it should be, this should go on forever. But Daniel and I have tried now 4 times to record a podcast over a reasonable amount of time, and I'm happy to say, failed all 4 times. But I want to thank you for joining us and for sharing your experience as an upcoming and hopefully a future umpire who you'll get to watch on television. And I wish you all the very best for that. So thank you very much. I really enjoyed listening to your insights.
Thank you very much. I know the focus has been on umpiring today. Can I have a couple of just parting shots to Dan, who I have with before, actually. He's an absolutely fantastic commentator. I love listening to him. As I've been grilled for the last hour and a half, Dan, a couple of points that I'm sure you would never say. But when the bowler cuts the wide line with a wide Yorker, and the commentator says he's lucky to get away with that, that absolutely boils, that frustrates me immensely, because that's a highly skilled ball from the bowler. And the commentator goes, he's just got away with that one. That's the ball he's meant to bowl. I'm sure you wouldn't be one to say that.
I would never say that. Do you know, I have learned to love the wide, filthy Yorker. Having been brought up to despise that ball, because I was brought up in Test cricket in the 1970s, watching bowlers bowl slow, short filth and wide, full balls, and them being the most successful balls in cricket, initially challenged me, but now I recognise them for the skills that they really are.
Well, I've got one more for you. The double bluff. The double bluff cannot stand.
I hate the double bluff.
Good.
It's either a bluff or it isn't a bluff.
Yeah, it's either a bluff or it's the plan.
Exactly.
Putting a man back, then bowling short is the plan. Putting a man back, then bowling a full ball is a bluff. There's no double bluff.
You're absolutely correct. I've never, honestly, Jack, I am with you on that, and I have been flying that flag on commentary for years. There's nothing annoys me more. The double bluff is the fail. That's what the double bluff actually means. A triple bluff, on the other hand, that might work.
Well, since we're pointing out all the foibles of commentators, I must point out my all-time favorite description of a googly by Ramiz Raja, who's the great old Pakistani opener and now commentator, and he does commentary both in Hindi and English. and he's great fun and slightly mad. But he once described the googly as a back of the palm delivery, you know.
Oh.
And I still burst out laughing when I think of that. It's one of, you know,
Well,
it's a
well, until you've bowled a proper back of the palm delivery, Carters, which involves you actually chiseling out a large amount of your hand flesh. Because this is spinners used to just dip their hands in bull urine. Now they actually cut out great parts of their hand for their art.
The one that got me as well was express yourself. Very often you hear captains or coaches or rarely commentators will say, "Oh, he's expressed it. Go out and express yourself." As a bowler who bowled 67 miles an hour off the wrong foot, the idea that was me expressing myself couldn't bear to think.
It's yeah. I think I'm firmly of the view that umpires are more sinned against by commentators than sinning against the game by making umpiring errors. I think umpires get an amazing number of decisions right compared to the average Joe. Like compared to me and Daniel, I think the umpires would get, you, for example, Jack, would probably sort of beat us by at least an order of magnitude in sort of non-trivial decisions. It's one of the most remarkable things in the game, which is that it's such a difficult skill, and yet it is such a deceptive skill, and so it's very, very easy for people to sort of take aim at umpires. And umpires traditionally in our game have never had the opportunity to defend themselves. The players can come after the day's play and talk to the press, and more importantly, they still have the next game where they can compete again. But the umpires, they have no such opportunity. They are basically, and increasingly, on television, I think at times it has gotten to a place where umpires are just not protected, and they should be.
Yeah, no, I agree with all that. I do think the best umpires are sort of seen and not heard, and there's a good reason that they don't have big social media profiles and the like. But no, I completely agree with everything you said there, and it can be open season on them sometimes.
Yeah, and in these times, given all the awful stuff you hear from time to time about crazy people reacting to crazy things on social media, I think there's some responsibility to not recklessly say that an umpire is incompetent. Firstly, because it's wrong on the substance, and second, because you have to be mindful of the consequences of that.
Yeah, no, I'm with you entirely.
I have to say that I think that umpires in their perfect form are, and I'm going to make a reference to a 1950s TV program now, they're basically Dixon of Dock Green. They are this ideal imagining of a beat bobby on a bicycle in rural England, where they clip small boys round the ear for stealing an apple from a passing cart, and tell them that they'll tell their mothers if they don't reform their behaviour, and no one ever gets sent to prison. That's the kind of English ideal of the umpire, and long may that. It's the one myth of Englishness that I would preserve, is that umpire.
On that wonderful note, Daniel, thank you.
I've had a thoroughly lovely conversation. It's exactly the sort of conversation that people don't have about umpiring enough. And in my experience, being serious for a moment, we are really cruel and critical about umpires in commentary boxes. I try not to be. I think of Joel Wilson during the Ashes in 2019 and how things began to sort of pile on to him as the scrutiny became tighter and tighter, and mistakes were made, but there were mistakes that were so marginal and so explicable. And if that happened to any of us in our real life, and every single one of our mistakes was dissected in the same way, we would consider it to be unfair. How they managed to maintain their mental health in the face of this scrutiny, I do not know. but they are absolutely vital for the game to happen in the first place. And it's slightly worryingly typical of the modern world that the very people that ensure that we get to enjoy the thing that we absolutely love are sometimes afforded the least respect, or at least their skills are understood least of all. They are the experts that that we have eschewed in large part in favour of bloviating nonsense on social media. So long may the umpire continue. She is what makes our game great. And I really, really look forward to England becoming crap at one-day cricket so that Jack can officiate in a World Cup final before too long.
Hear, hear. Well, thank you, Jack.
No, my pleasure. Thank you, Kartik, and thank you, Dan, as well. Really enjoyed it. And speak again.